My name is Susanna Fischer, and I'm on the faculty at Columbia School of Law at the Catholic University of America. And I teach copyright, cyber law, civil procedure, and comparative law. And because my main area of interest is in the law of intellectual property and technology, I didn't really need much urging to start to experiment with classroom technology from the very beginning of my teaching career. But I'll confess to you that that wasn't very long ago. I only started teaching about a year ago in August of 1999. And I wanted to use the internet and the World Wide Web in my courses, particularly in cyber law, where I wanted most of the required readings to be online. I also wanted to use online materials to supplement traditional casebooks in my copyright and civil procedure courses. And I haven't started teaching comparative law yet, but I'm sure I will do something similar in that class too. And over the past year, I've tried out several different web course management systems because I'm so junior that I don't have any fear about experimentation or disaster. And these course systems are the subject of my talk today. I'm not going to try to persuade you of the merits of using the internet and the World Wide Web in your law school teaching. I assume you've already been convinced, if not before this conference, at this conference, by some of the really helpful presentations like Professor Joseph's on his use of Twin, if not by the somewhat scary future suggested by the plenary speakers. And why use web course management systems? These systems help you to create and manage course web pages while saving you from having to learn HTML, which, as I'm sure you all know, is the lingua franca of the World Wide Web, at least until XML really comes into its own. And I'd venture to say that most law faculty, if forced to take the time to learn HTML, are likely to end up in the frustrated position of this duck on the slide here, who's taking the ultimate Luddite sledgehammer to his computer. So I hope to ensure that you don't end up in the position of this duck and to spare your IT staff some agony. My goal today is to help you to decide what web course management systems would be best for you by taking a comparative approach to some of the main possibilities. And you should bear in mind that there's no one best web course management system for everyone. So you're not going to walk out of this room with the message that there's only one system that everyone should use. And it really should not come as a surprise to anyone. If there was a best system, then I wouldn't have to be up here for an hour. We could all leave after 2 minutes. The most important point that I'm going to make today is that the merits of particular web course management systems are highly relative. And they really depend on the teacher's goals and priorities. So it's critical to think about what your particular pedagogical goals and priorities are for a particular course before you choose any particular web course management system. I'll sometimes call this, by the way, web courseware. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. And if, like the majority of my very impatient students, you feel happiest and most secure if you know where you're going to be going, I've provided you with a roadmap in an effort to accommodate you. And in the first part of my talk, I'm going to describe what I think are the 4 major types of web course management systems that you could use for a law school course. And then I'm going to highlight what I think are the most important issues that you should choose, rather that you should consider, before you choose any particular web courseware for use in your law school course. As I've said, and I'm going to be saying it again, in order to make an informed selection of the best web course management systems for your law school course, you really have to be aware of what your own priorities and goals are to make an informed choice. Whatever you choose might not be the best system for somebody else's course. Third, I'm going to compare some of the major web course management systems from the perspective of these important issues. And in making these comparisons, I'll try to give you some examples from my own teaching. And I'll finish off by leaving some time for questions and discussion. And so that I can make sure that I get through the material that I want to cover in this session, I'd appreciate it if you could hold your questions and comments for the period at the end of the session. There will be time. Unless, of course, you've got something really urgent to say, like the building is on fire or something like that. law teacher has to choose between a growing array of web course management tools, and I've divided them into 4 categories. First, there are systems that are created specifically for legal education, and of course those are Lexis Web Course in a Box, which I'll call Lexis, sorry, Web Course in a Box, and the West Education Newtwork, which I'll call Twin. There are also systems that are created for educators, but not specifically for legal education. And an example is WebCT, which is used by my home institution, the Catholic University of America. Another example is Blackboard. Thirdly, there are customized systems that are designed for a particular institution. An example of that is the Harvard Berkman Center Rotisserie courseware that Michelle Spalding described in her really interesting presentation on Wednesday. And although not all of this customized software will be made available to other institutions, some, like Rotisserie, is being made available on an open code basis. And finally, what I call DIY systems, do-it-yourself systems, using HTML authoring tools like Microsoft Front Page or Netscape Composer to build your course pages. Of course, the ultimate course management system is coding your own HTML, but I feel that goes beyond the scope of this talk because, as I've said before, I don't think most faculty have the time or patience or inclination to do that. So the upshot of all this is that you've got a lot of choices, and that seems good in a way, but there's also some downsides. When you're confronted by a lot of options, people really have a tendency to feel overwhelmed. And there's kind of a natural tendency to do one of 2 things, which I think can be compared to some slightly unpleasant animals. The first choice you've got, your natural choice, is to be a sloth. In other words, to do nothing and put off your decision to use WebCourseWare until you've got all the time in the world to deal with the question, meaning forever. So this has an obvious disadvantage that you're not getting the benefit of using the web or internet in your course, which we've already assumed is a good thing. Or you can follow the crowd, that is, be a lemming, this is a lemming, or just use whatever WebCourseWare system is most widely used in your institution, even though you haven't really considered whether it's the best system for a particular course that you're teaching. So I would counsel you to take a different and what I think is a better approach to either the sloth or the lemming. And my goal today is to help you to come to an informed decision about the best web courseware for you to use in your particular course. You'll recall that I said earlier that the most important point that I would make today is that it's very, very important to consider what your goals and priorities are for your law school course. Now I'm going to let you know what I believe to be the 10 most important issues that you need to resolve before deciding on particular web courseware. You're probably saying to yourself, 10 issues? That's an awful lot of issues. It's how horribly complicated, and I think that sloth option seems quite appealing. Well, I can reassure you that some of the categories do overlap to some extent. And the cold, hard reality, however, is that the decision isn't completely simple and straightforward. There's a lot of things that you need to decide before picking web course software that's going to be best for your particular course. Ultimately, you're going to have to balance how different systems treat these issues against each other in light of your own decision about your own goals and priorities. A caveat, I'm mentioning the 10 issues that I think are most important to most law school teachers, but there may be other issues depending on your particular goals. And in the interest of time, I can't cover every single possible issue that you might want to think about for your course. So in this second part of my presentation, I'm really just going to introduce these 10 issues. And then in the third comparative part of my talk, I'm going to compare how these various specific course management systems, including Twin and Lexis Web Course in a Box, treat these issues in practice. The first issue for you to resolve is how concerned you are about the appearance of your course pages. Do you want your pages to be absolutely unique, or are you comfortable with using a cookie-cutter template that will resemble other course pages, at least to some extent? You should bear in mind that cookie-cutter templates can be personalized to some extent depending on the system, but such templates will never give you complete flexibility over the design of your web course pages. Another important question that's related to the appearance of the course pages is the extent to which you want to incorporate graphics or multimedia in your course pages. So you have to ask yourself, is it important for you to include music files, video, and or animation on your site to achieve your pedagogical goals? And if so, how much of this type of multimedia do you want to include? Some courseware systems permit much more flexibility with multimedia than others. Finally, to what extent will the material that you create appear in the same way as it looked to you when you created it, when it's viewed by users or students in different internet browsers? Some HTML editing tools are better than others in this what you see is what you get regard. Issue number 2 is speed. How important is it for your students to be able to access your course pages quickly? This is an important issue for many students. My students found it to be very important, especially if they're generally not using high-speed internet connections, but they're accessing the internet through slower dial-up connections. Some students will lose patience completely if a page is too slow to download, and many will simply give up and fail to access the course website. Obviously, it's important to ensure that this doesn't happen with your site. Another issue related to speed is whether or not users can directly access your course pages by typing in or bookmarking a specific URL. Will your students rebel if they're required to go through multiple entry screens to access your site or type in passwords to access your site? And I'll discuss the issue of restricted or open access to your pages more in a little bit. You'll recall that I said these issues do overlap to some extent. The third issue is which server is going to host your course pages. This issue is really intertwined with the issue of speed because the server's capabilities, as well as the routing between servers, is an important factor that affects speed of access to your page. And the reliability of a server is also pretty important, in fact, essential to any access to your page. So you need to be able to decide whether you want your course pages to be on a particular server, because different web courseware providers have got different options as to which servers can host a course page. Some courseware providers require you to use their servers, and with others you've got the option to use different servers, like your institution servers or an ISP to host your course web pages. So you have to think about whether you're comfortable, even perhaps happier with your course pages being hosted on a courseware provider server, or whether you want it on a particular server. The fourth issue is licenses. You need to ascertain whether you'll have to enter into a license to use particular web courseware. If a license is required, you need to find out whether your institution has a site license for the particular courseware. And if not, you need to assess the license cost, if any, and determine whether or not you're prepared to pay it, or your institution is prepared to pay it. And of course, all you lawyers out there know that you are well advised to check the terms of any license for the particular web courseware before you enter into any license. It's remarkable how many lawyers have a tendency to forget this important advice, particularly when they're dealing with shrink-wrap licenses. Just click yes, oh yes, don't read. The next issue, number 5, is access. And this is the question of whether you want your course pages to be accessible to the world at large, available to anybody who's got a web browser. If you're teaching in Georgia and they're in Finland, they can see your web pages, or whether you're really nervous about that and you want your pages to be accessible only to students who are registered in your course. Some people feel very, very strongly about this issue, and you need to consider whether you're uncomfortable with the whole world seeing your course pages, and also you need to consider what your students will think about this issue of open access. Many students are reluctant to post on discussion fora that are accessible to the world at large, although it's also true that I think as a discussion during Professor Joseph's session indicated that a lot of students are reluctant to post on discussion fora, period. On the other hand, having an openly accessible website can be a good way to make contact with others interested in your field, I've certainly had contact with people in different continents who have seen one of my open websites and been interested in what I was doing. And it also can be a helpful resource for students and professors who are in different courses elsewhere. I don't know Professor Cox, Stan Cox is here, but my students found his civil procedure page very, very helpful. It had a lot of hypotheticals on it that they could look at when they wanted more problems than I felt that I could create for them. They had an insatiable appetite for doing more and more civil procedure problems. They were first years and very nervous about the exam. You might prefer an in-between kind of option, something between full openness and closed access. And one example is password protecting certain portions of your site, like discussion groups, while making the rest of the site available to all. Another in-between is guest passwords, so that you know exactly who's going onto your site, only people that you've approved. Sixth issue, administration rights. Who's the administrator of your course pages? That is, who's the person who's responsible for adding, deleting, posting, modifying course content? Who do you think should have the rights to do this? And this may be a very important issue if you've got a co-teacher in your course. And you need to consider whether you want your co-teacher to have identical rights to you. What about student TAs or just generally students? If you want to use your law school or university server, you need to ascertain who can have rights to post material on that server, or whether staff must do this on the behalf of faculty. Maybe you prefer the job to be done by staff, even if you do have the rights to do this. So you need to really think about who is going to sit there and plug everything in to this site, and who do you want to be able to take things away off your site without your express permission. Issue number 7 is issue privacy. Some web courseware companies collect information on customers by setting cookies. They're little pieces of information that are stored by your browser on your computer's hard drive, which that courseware provider could require to be sent to them before they accede to a user computer's request for a courseware web page. And these courseware providers require users to set their browser preferences to accept cookies. And you need to think about whether this bothers you philosophically, and if it does, you need to check out how the information is used by carefully reading the relevant privacy policies, if any. Another privacy concern, a little different, is usage tracking. The extent to which web courseware allows you to act like that little detective on the screen and track your students' use of your course pages, like how many times a particular student visits a particular page. You should ask yourself to what extent you find those tracking features necessary or desirable. Next issue is functionality, and this is the issue that everybody really thinks about first, perhaps, when they're thinking about web courseware. You need to think about the specific features that you want your course pages to have. And on the slide there's some examples: a discussion forum, syllabus online, announcements page online, a course calendar where you can post important dates and events for your course. How about student web pages for student course projects or other uses? Just a personal web page for a student, for example. What about pages that are set up for particular lessons or particular topics in your course? So I want to teach, for example, personal jurisdiction and have a bunch of specific lessons, quizzes, and so on, all grouped together on a particular page. How about interactive online quizzes? What about a home page for the professor? You may or may not have one already. You may want to link to your own, or you may want to create one specifically really for use with the course. How about a searchable glossary of terms? Law is like a new language for many students, and oftentimes that's something that people find to be helpful. So you need to consider, again, not to sound like a broken record, but you need to consider which of these features are most important to you in light of your own pedagogical goals. And the 9th issue is your course materials. This requires determining whether your course materials are going to be pretty much online, as I've done with my cyber law course, because it's cyber law and I feel the students need to learn to deal with the World Wide Web. Or you're going to really use your course primarily as a supplement to other traditional course materials like casebooks, problem books, and so on, as I do in civil procedure, where I use both of those traditional things. kinds of online materials do you want to link to from your course web pages? To what extent do you want to link to other websites? Do you want your users to be able to link directly into Lexis or Westlaw proprietary materials, as applicable, bypassing intermediate search screens? How about CALI lessons? You should think about whether you're comfortable with others creating links to materials that are posted on your site. I think the general trend of the case law on copyright and linking indicates that simply creating a link to another person's site will not amount to a copyright violation. So if you're uncomfortable with somebody else linking to your site, then you'll have to consider technological protection measures like passwords. And of course, it goes without saying that you must have rights under copyright or other applicable law to post materials that are created by others on your course website. That's something that actually people frequently forget and disregard. The 10th issue, final issue, is to consider the learning curve that's required to master a particular web courseware. That is, the time and effort required. I mean, we're all busy. You need to consider the availability and quality of offline and online help materials available to both professors and students. And you should also consider the availability of other training resources. For example, if one system of web courseware is widely used in your institution, there may be training staff or classes that are in-house that are available to you, and or just informal advice from colleagues who are already familiar with the system. So now that I've raised these 10 important issues that I think you need to consider before choosing particular web courseware, in the next part of my talk I'm going to look at how some specific web courseware deals with the 10 issues that I mentioned. And my comparisons are going to focus on the following web courseware management systems. First, two systems that are designed specifically for legal education. TWEN, and the URL for the current version of TWEN is on the slide. And I think my slides are going to be posted on the CALI site, so you don't need to worry about writing these down. Plus, of course, in those two rooms, you can get all the information you would ever need on Lexis and Westlaw, plus lots of free handouts. A new version of TWEN is in beta, early beta, and it's coming out. It has a release date of August 7th. And you can view the early beta version of this new TWEN, which is not exactly what's coming out in August, on the second URL on the slide, the one that's got the beta in it. And the second legal education system I'll consider is the customized version of Web Course in a Box that was licensed by by Lexis. And I'll shorten that to Lexis. The most recent version of that is 4.0, and again, there are materials on that available here. There have been several classes on using Lexis Web Course in a Box at this conference. And the third system that I'll compare, WebCT, is an example of educational courseware that was designed for general educational use, not specifically for law schools. And the most recent version is 2.1. You can preview 3.0. And the online tutorials are only available for version 2.0, so it's a little bit confusing. At Catholic University, we only have available 2.0 right now, so unfortunately many of my examples will come from 2.0. There are a few more features that some of the more recent versions have. Final type is what I call DIY, not strictly speaking courseware systems, but just generally HTML authoring tools like Microsoft WebPage or Netscape Composer. And obviously these are not the only types of systems that you could consider for use in your course. There's many other systems you could use, but time constraints are really just forcing me to pick a few of them that I think are really the most likely to be considered by law faculty. I think Lexis and TWEN really require inclusion because they're specifically designed for legal education. WebCT is used by my own institution. We have a site license for that. We host it on our own server, and so I'm more familiar with that. I'm not discussing Blackboard. Why not? You may think, why not? They're here. And after all, Blackboard in March acquired Mad Duck Technologies, which developed Web Course in a Box. And so it looks like Lexis will be working with Blackboard. Of course, they will be now, not Web Course in a Box, although they're really the same developers. The reason is that right now, I don't think the licensing options for Blackboard 5 are really something that an individual faculty member in a law school can really make an individual choice about, because the licensing costs for Blackboard 5 are quite high. They're designed for institutions adopting Blackboard 5 for the whole institution. The cheapest license right now for unlimited courses is $5,000 for level 1, which is just a course management system. If you want the portal feature that they've added to Blackboard 5, it goes up to $50,000. So it's not really something that an individual faculty member without some institutional backing can really consider. So there was a separate presentation on Blackboard 5, and I decided not to cover that. Now, you could use Blackboard.com for free, which is another Blackboard courseware. And that's available on Blackboard.com website. It's free, but there are space limitations. You can only post on your course pages 5 megabytes of material. And if you pay an additional $100, you get some tech support, and you can post another 5 megs, bringing it up to 10. But again, because of the space limitations, I just decided not to discuss it. It had nothing to do with whether I think Blackboard is a good product. It's just I can't cover everything. System requirements, very brief words, because I don't think this is really a major issue for most law faculty. I'm just not going to go through the slide in depth. Your institution is virtually certain to easily be able to meet the system requirements for all of these. Essentially, you need web access and a graphical web browser. And for Westlaw, of course, you need a Westlaw password. I'm going to talk about access requirements in a little bit. Appearance. You remember the first issue that I mentioned that you have to resolve is the extent to which you care about the appearance of your site. And Lexis, Twin, and WebCT all use what I call templates for their course web pages. And these templates are easier to use than DIY options, at least for I think most people, but they're more inflexible, so it's a trade-off. You generally will only have a limited number of options for your page design and appearance. And the result of this is if you use, say, Lexis Courseware or any of the other 2 options I mentioned, your course pages will bear substantial resemblance to other, say, Lexis pages. You can't change the appearance of the pages beyond a certain amount, which differs between these different systems. So you need to decide how much you care about this. If you use a DIY option, like Microsoft FrontPage or Netscape Composer, you will have more control over the appearance of your site, but it probably will take you a little bit more work to create it, especially compared to the default templates that are available in these template courseware systems. So what are the differences between the Lexis Twin and WebCT templates? This is an example of a Lexis, or rather a Web Course in a Box template. And it really, although this is actually a non-law course, it's a Web Course in a Box, non-customized courseware. It's virtually identical to the law school customized version. And you'll see that basically the home page has these navigational icons that you can use to get to the internal web pages for your course. And because this is a template-based system, as I said, you haven't got unlimited control over the appearance of this site. So, for example, you can rearrange these icons into, say, a list format, but you can't get rid of the icons. Well, you can actually get rid of the icons, but not get rid of the concept of the icons completely, if that makes any sense. You also are limited to no more than 6 of these icons and no more than 2 additional links on your course page. So if you want your course page to have 20 links on it, you can't do it. So that's a question of your own web page design. You can't upload files to this page. The only thing you can do is you can actually upload different GIF or JPEG files to be your icons, but you can't have a picture of yourself or of your class on your Lexis course page. So the key word is really what I call limited flexibility here. Another feature of the template system that I've sort of skimmed over is defaults. And this makes the template simple to use because you don't have to fiddle with anything. And you can create a baseline course with automatic features. And these are the 6 default icons that you would have on any web course in a box Lexis course. You can change them, or you could reduce the number, but you can't increase the number. Here's an example of a Lexis default internal web page. I'm sorry, it's a little difficult to read this. It's also based on a template. These internal templates in Lexis are somewhat more flexible than a home page. You have to use, for this course info page, you've got to use the heading and text box format, but you can insert whatever headings you want in place of these defaults or in addition to these defaults. So if you don't really like goals and objectives, you can change that. You could change it to goals, you could get rid of it completely, you could change it to welcome, you could do whatever you wanted. And you can have as many links to another website on these internal pages as you want. And you can also upload any files to your course info page that the user's computer is going to be capable of viewing. Again, limited flexibility, however. You can change the background and link colors, but you have to change the colors for every page except for some of these lesson pages. I don't know why they made that decision. It's just the way it is. I think they want you, again, it's the developers saying, I want your pages to sort of have some kind of consistency. But perhaps you don't want to. My CyberLaw page actually has, every page is a different color. I have had criticism from my students about that, but I like it. These are the authoring tools for Lexis. They use a pull-down menu. It's not a frame that's shown on this slide. And then this is not entirely what you see. You also see what your page looks like. I'm afraid this is a little bit hard to read, but you get the idea that you click on this pull-down menu to edit specific pages. This is a Twen site. Unfortunately, it is the current, not the new early beta version of Twen. I couldn't get that because it's still really in development. If you want to see what the new version looks like, though, you can go onto the website that is on the other slide, the lawschoolbeta.westlaw.com, and you can see what that looks like. And I'll point out some of the important differences between the old and the new Twen, but in many ways, it looks not dissimilar, in my opinion. One very big difference is that this version of Twen used frames, made very heavy use of frames. So on the left, that gray area is a frame, and then the internal area of my courses is a separate frame. They've abandoned the frames, and now, although it looks like there are frames on the new beta version of Twen, they're not there. They just appear to be frames. Makes it a lot faster. I think there are a lot of complaints about the frames. However, even though this changed version of Twen is sort of similar to Lexis in that regard, I think Twen looks very, very different from Lexis. It's much more text-based, doesn't have these icons, and it's really kind of a completely different experience for your students. Twen also uses templates. They can also be partially customized, although to a different extent than Lexis. And again, it's kind of a philosophical difference between the developers. For example, the developers of Twen don't allow you to change the color of the background of the links or anything. It's their take, I believe, that they don't think faculty are really concerned about that, and that they'd rather, just focus on the content. Lexis and WebCT both allow you to do that. There are certain default fora, they call internal course pages fora on Twen, and the defaults are course materials, discussion, or syllabus. So again, there's this kind of option of an easy course creation with certain fora. And Twen, the new version of Twen, has changed these fora. And it used to be that all fora you could have your students post responses if you chose to exercise that option. Now they basically changed it so that you've got apples and oranges in terms of your forums. Some students can post responses to, and others, only the professor can post documents or the course administrator onto those pages. It's really a distinction without a difference in a way because the functionality is exactly the same as before. On the internal web pages of Twen, you've got a lot of flexibility to post links and to upload files of any kind, again, that the user's computer can access. This is WebCT, version 2.0, not the most recent version. It's from an online tutorial that's available for WebCT. And you can see, in many ways, it looks a lot like Lexis. The students will only see the upper frame on the slide. The lower frame is an authoring toolbar. And use of icons. This is a template system again. I think it has a bit more flexibility than Web Course in a Box or Twin. You can change the background image, the color scheme of the home page. It's got headings that you can change. There's an option of a page counter. You can reorganize the arrangement of the icons. But I think what makes WebCT really more flexible than either of the other two options is that it's got a means to organize your course pages hierarchically. You can group sort of topics and subtopics, and you can create paths for your course. This is quite complicated to learn to use, but it again is more flexibility for the creator of the page. And to me, that's sort of the fundamental difference between WebCT, other than some differences about course materials that I'll talk about later, but in terms of appearance. DIY, it's hard to really generalize. This is things like Microsoft Front Page. Got more flexibility than any of the other educational web courseware, because it's not really educational web courseware, but there are no course templates or default templates to fall back on. So you've got to consider, what your priorities are. Speed. How quickly can students access the content? To some extent, this is going to depend on the host server. I'll get to that in a minute. I want to say one brief word about an issue that relates to speed, direct access. Can a student directly access the course page by typing in a URL or by using a bookmark, or do they have to go through multiple entry screens first? And this was really up until this summer kind of an issue for Twin, because you couldn't access most of the course pages through a URL. You had to sort of go back and do it through the forum, but you couldn't go directly, say, to your syllabus page. Twin, in the new version, is changing that, and they've assigned each internal course page a URL, so that if the students want to bookmark the syllabus page or internal page, they can now go there. With both WebCT and with Lexis, you can do this. Of course, there are issues of passwords, and it really depends, how much your students care, that apply to Twin and WebCT, although not necessarily to Lexis. I'll talk about that in a minute. The server. Some differences here. West, you only have the option of your course pages being hosted on West servers. No other choice for Twin. You might think that's great, or you might think, what a disaster. There have been some issues with speed in the past. West is certainly very committed to working on speed, but I have to say that my students had some issues with speed when I used Twin in the fall of 1999. The best thing is to try out Twin during, at all times sort of during the day when there are students around, and sort of see how it goes for you, see if you can stand it, and get some feedback from your students. The same goes for Lexis if you would like to have it hosted on the Lexis server, which is an option. Alternatively, your institution can get a license for hosting a customized version of Web Course in a Box by your own institutions. You can do that. I think William Mitchell College of Law does that. I don't know if there's anyone here who's had experience of doing that. WebCT, you also have a choice of having a course site hosted on WebCT server or your institution server. My home institution, Catholic University, hosts WebCT on our own server. Why do you care what server it's on? Speed. Although, of course, the server is not the only factor that comes into being when you're considering speed of access, but it's an important factor. Also, reliability of the server. You've got to be, give your own institution server or any ISP that you're thinking of using a cold, hard look, because if your course page is all down, then you may as well not have it at all. And your students will quickly lose interest. They don't have infinite patience for, servers being down. Licenses. Lexis, no license is required, and it's free. When you and your users both have to enter into member agreements with West, it's a no-fee license. The license does make it clear that you retain all copyright and other rights and data that you provide on Twin, but there's some terms about making this data available to other TWEN members in sort of limited quantities and for limited purposes. If you're concerned about that, I suggest that you get a copy of the member agreement. It's a shrink wrap agreement. It can be a little bit hard to obtain a copy of it. So you have to contact your TWEN representative. WebCT, a license is required. The fee varies depending on the number of students and how long the course is. For a 4-month license that's hosted on your own institution's server, for 0 to 25 students per course, it's $100, and it goes up to $5,200 or over for more students, more time, and hosted on WebCT's server. They actually have a very helpful pricing grid on their site where they set out the license fees for most situations, if you're interested. And DIY, you have to purchase the license for Microsoft Front Page. You don't for Netscape Composer. It comes with the browser. And for both of those, there are license agreements. And I put the Netscape one on the slide, the URL for that if you want to look at it. Access. There's a difference here between Lexis and Westlaw. Lexis, the default is that access control is off. That is, anybody can access your course materials except discussion groups, student project pages, and quizzes, which are password protected. You can't change that. However, you can elect to have your site completely closed, except to registered students. You have to have a password and a username to access the site. Or you could have your site closed, but you can permit guest access. TWEN, the opposite really. Other than a home page that you can make generally available, TWEN pages can only be accessed by people with Westlaw passwords who are registered onto your course, although they permit you to create guest access. So it's really a philosophical difference from Lexis and TWEN, and the West people said to me that they were concerned about their proprietary materials. Lexis, of course, also allows you to hot link into their proprietary materials. Their philosophy is we'll just wall off, we'll require passwords for those materials, access to those materials, the rest of the site default is open. WebCT, the default is to require passwords, but you can create what's called a welcome page into your course, which anybody can access, and that you can allow people to access your course from by just creating a password from there. And of course, do-it-yourself, the default is open. Who's the administrator? TWEN permits co-teachers who teach at law school to have full administration rights. Student TAs can also have those, but not students. Again, their philosophy is students should not be allowed to modify pages. Students also can't have their own web pages on TWEN, their own personal web pages or project web pages that they're changing. For Lexis, each course must have a primary instructor who can create the course and who owns the course, and is the only person who can delete the course. Lexis permits secondary instructors who can edit but not delete the course. And then you can have certain guest instructors who can only view the course and participate in discussion fora and in quizzes. And you can copy classes between instructors. WebCT is the most inflexible in this regard. You can only have one course administrator, and the solution that I was given by our administrators at our institution was, well, just hand a password and username to someone that you want to give administration rights to. I personally think that's sort of the least helpful solution. And the DIY systems, here, you either have to have a site license and then your staff would have rights, or the person would have to have a personal license. And the issue here is who's got web server rights to post material on your web server. Some institutions are quite picky about who they allow to put things up on their server. So you have to find that out if you're thinking about using these options. You may not even have the rights to do this. In my institution, I do, and it makes it very easy to modify because I can do it at 3 a.m. if I want to. So I like that. Privacy concerns. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the cookies, really. Both West, WebCT, and Lexis all set cookies and require you to set your browser preferences to accept cookies. Lexis doesn't really have a privacy policy for web course in a box. They say that they have another privacy policy which probably applies, but strangely they don't really have one for web course in a box. West has a privacy policy which you can view. It's hard to see these URLs, but they're there. Both Lexis and West representatives told me that they don't use any information on users for anything except to allow sort of seamless access without having to repeatedly plug in your passwords onto the pages. WebCT also has a privacy policy. They all say they don't sell any information or give it to third parties. But the privacy policy is a little different. If you were really concerned about this, I would certainly advise you to look into this issue further. Usage tracking for students. Pretty much all of these have this. That is, you can see how many times your students are accessing particular course pages. It can be very helpful. Some people, however, worry about this as a privacy issue. And on the do-it-yourself systems, you usually have to, it's sort of an issue of what extensions you have on your server. Microsoft's front page has the ability to have certain hit counters, but you have to have certain extensions on the server to use those. Functionality, quite different in many ways. Threaded discussion forums, pretty much everyone has that, except for, say, Microsoft front page, where again you need the server extension. Syllabus page, again, everyone has that pretty much as a default. They may call it a course info page. Announcements on Twin, you can easily create a forum called announcements if you want a specific page for that. WebCT, you can put announcements in a banner headline on the course homepage, which I think is a very helpful feature because students oftentimes don't go to the internal announcements page. And Lexis has a default forum for announcements. Calendar, Lexis and WebCT both have course calendar features, and Twin is adding one in the new version. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know really how it operates. It's supposed to be very similar to the Yahoo calendar. I think it's fairly, straightforward calendar where you can post events for your course. This can be very helpful. Interactive quizzes, again, this was a difference between Lexis and Twin. It's now changing. Now they all have this option of interactive quizzes for short answer, multiple choice, and essay quizzes. And the multiple choice quizzes can be automatically graded. The essay quizzes are sent back to the instructor for the instructor's input. Emailing of students, there is a difference between Lexis and the new version of Twin on this. On Twin, you can now email groups of students, small groups. So if perhaps you have some kind of clinical setup going where you only want a certain little group of students to have access to certain information that you're emailing out, you can do that. On Lexis, you can't. You can only email one student or all the students in a batch. Student web pages, Lexis has this, Twin doesn't, WebCT does. So if you want your students to be doing web-based projects, Lexis or WebCT are probably better options than Twin because they have this option. Gradebooks. Lexis and WebCT have little gradebooks, and Twin doesn't really have this, although they do have the ability for the quiz results to go back to the instructor. Specific lessons. You can basically do this on all three of these courseware systems. Although Lexis calls it a lesson page, in Twin you would have to name your forum a lesson page. And it's not a formal thing, but here you can post all kinds of materials and link it to a particular topic. A faculty homepage on Lexis, you have the ability to do this on WebCT as well. On Twin, you can't. There's a certain little information about the faculty, but it's not really a fully fledged faculty web page. You might not care because you might have your own web page somewhere else. And a glossary, the only one that really does this is WebCT. They have a searchable glossary feature, so if you're doing a very technical kind of subject and that's important and that was critical, then WebCT is the one with that. The ninth issue, almost done, course materials. And the real difference here is the hot linking ability to either Westlaw or Lexis. Obviously, WebCT and the DIY systems don't have that. Now, I, on my cyber law page, do link sometimes to things that are either only available in Westlaw or Lexis, but the students, of course, have to plug in a password. And I think that does have, perhaps some impact as to whether they access those particular sites. However, as we saw again in Professor Joseph's presentation yesterday, there certainly seem to be many people who have philosophical objections to using these proprietary course systems. So again, you've got to think about how you feel about all of this. And there's some inflexibility, as we saw before, about what you can put on the home page in terms of links. And maybe it's terribly important for you to have certain links on your home page. Very hard to do that in Lexis, Twin, or WebCT. You really have to use some kind of DIY offering system. And finally, the learning curve. And I will just give you my take on this. Yours might differ. I think some people find these things more, intuitively different to use than others. Some people, for example, Professor Joseph said he found Twin intuitively very easy to use and Lexis very difficult to use. I actually sort of feel the opposite, which is interesting, although I think that Twin is very easy to use as well. I found that the offline professor's materials for Lexis very intuitive for me, personally. And DIY, I think, well, actually, first WebCT, I think there's no doubt that that's more complex for most people, especially this kind of path hierarchy. There are more features, and it makes it more complex. DIY, again, although these DIY operating systems are really not very hard to use, and you can already use a word processor. Sometimes, people find it harder. You don't have the support. You don't have a Lexis rep who's, already affiliated with your school. You don't have people there. You have to really do it yourself. Some people like that. Some people hate it. I've done that too. I do it in one of my courses, and I like it because I have more control over my pages. Although, I hasten to add, not complete control. I would have to code in HTML if I wanted complete control. Even then, I wouldn't have complete control over how every browser would do this. So anyway, I hope this comparative exercise has made you aware that the choice is a very individual choice of what web course management courseware you want to use. And it really depends on how you resolve these 10 issues that we've explored and maybe some additional issues that are particularly important to you and for your particular course. You might want to use different courseware systems for different courses that you teach. I do. I'm going to use Lexis for one in the fall, and I use Microsoft Front Page to create another one. I've used Twin. I've not used WebCT yet, but I'll probably try it out at some point just to get some feedback from my students. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone. That's all that I'm going to say. I'm going to throw the floor open for just some questions and discussion.
At some early point, I remember hearing that one of the, I can't remember if it was Lexis or Westlaw, that there were issues surrounding the retention of copyright to posted materials by one of the other vendors. Is that still an issue? Do we give up our rights to our creations?
No, I don't think that you do. From them, I have gotten the Twin member agreement, and I think it very clearly says that you retain your copyright rights in the materials that you create. The only thing that you might potentially give up is that I think in that member agreement it allows other members to copy some of your materials for very, very limited use and one-time uses. But you certainly would not be giving up your copyright rights. Yes?
Sometimes I want to have students do something online, and I don't know if other professors have this problem, but I've found that if you don't make it mandatory, you get shockingly low participation rates. And it's hugely time-consuming to track down and make sure that everyone's done what they're supposed to do. Do any of these have a thing to monitor if you say everyone has to do this by a certain date, where you can monitor that everyone has completed it?
The best one for you would probably be the Harvard Berkman Center Rotisserie course where you can cut off certain assignments. This is, they have a customized courseware system where they sort of roll out assignments and they have deadlines. I think on Lexis and Westlaw, you can email students. You have a feature where you can email students when sort of posting something made, but you would really need to put that in operation. I don't think that there are really time limits.
No, what I'm talking about is I want a report that says all 45 students except these 2 have completed the exercise. So you'll know that you only have to track down 2.
That, okay, if I understand your question, that you're interested in really user tracking for a specific exercise. That you can do through the usage tracking features. And again, Professor Joseph, correct me. I mean, to some extent,
I would say that for what you just said, the only one of the 3 that really will do that is WebCT. Because WebCT, and I would maybe make a general point, because I wouldn't group WebCT with the others. In my view, and I've taken WebCT training not only to higher learning curve, but I think that's the only one of these packages that is really designed to be an online course rather than to be a series of tools which supplement a live course. And so the WebCT is what, for example, I'm looking at right now for totally online courses, because it was really designed to do that. It was designed that there is no physical class happening. So it gives you a lot of tools, because the assumption is that you're not meeting students physically, you're only meeting them virtual. That's my take on WebCT, where I think both Lexis and Twen are probably better tools as assists to a line course. That would be my own.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you that the distance learning courses, that's probably true, and also this customized courseware that Harvard uses, and use it in connection with our Berkman Center distance learning courses. And so something like that also might work if your system could support that, because they just basically, it's open code, you get it, and you have to deal with whatever happens. I think it's really good, but I haven't tried to use it in my own institution. So I hope that answers your question. Yes?
When you were talking about a functionality feature that you called student project web pages,
Yes.
do you mean by that the opportunity for students to do collaborative work?
If I understand your question, what you're asking about is whether on student web pages that provides an opportunity to do collaborative work. And I was really thinking of a student web page just for a project where a student can post material, a paper, an exercise on the web. Now, they could do that collaboratively as well if you had several students modifying one particular course page. So yes, to me, I think there is the ability with a student project page to have more than one student working on that page at a particular time.
In all three systems?
No, not all three systems, because Twen does not have this ability. On Twen, they really don't have the idea that students are going to be creating project pages at all. If the student created something, the professor would essentially have to post it onto a Twen page. Pure students who are not TAs don't get administration rights.
Why would that be true? I'm sorry. It seems to me that my students create web pages and they post them as attached files, the URLs. That's not accurate unless I misunderstand what you're saying.
Well, they could create. You could just post it, but it would have to be, the page itself would have to be created by the professor. Maybe it's a distinction without a difference, because.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about a student in my common law class who created a page on Blackboard of Education and posted the URL. Maybe what you're saying is the URL would be on a different server. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that would be the student creating the page.
If the student work, I didn't have anything to do with it. You just click on it in your Twen forum, and there you are. I'm not sure what you're saying.
Sure, you can. I mean, I don't mean to denigrate Twen at all. You can. It's just really, and like I say, the functionality is probably similar. But what I think you're describing is the ability to link to a web page that was created elsewhere, right, as opposed to creating a web page as part of the course pages.
So it wouldn't be posted on the web server.
Yeah.
You're saying, okay.
Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. It wouldn't be posted as part of the course, but I agree with you that that may not make any real difference at all.
Whereas what I was looking for was whether you could have a team working on a joint project.
A joint project that is posted as part of the course pages, and I think that you can do that with both WebCT and with the Lexis course in a box, but really WebCT is the best for that, I think. It has, again, more flexibility in that regard if you care where it's being posted. Now, with all of these, you have the ability to go within. You could have something that you've done partially just in Microsoft front page, and then you're linking in and out of that through the course pages. So these systems aren't really closed systems, and you can sort of mix and match features if you feel like it. You could use Twen for a discussion forum, and then you could have some other course pages elsewhere. It's just a question as to how you navigate between those pages and how easy that is. Any other questions? Yes.
Why do you choose to use different systems for different courses?
Because as I said, the question is, why do I choose different systems for different courses? And it's really because I have different goals for different courses. Particularly with cyber law, one of my primary goals is to have the students really using the web for research, using the web for all their course materials, and becoming aware that a lot of legal materials are now available on the web, and learning how to find things on the web and how to search for things on the web. So I really wanted a lot of links on that page. Therefore, I was very, very concerned about the speed of downloading all the materials and reliability. I was less concerned about having a discussion forum in that course because it was a seminar and the students had a lot of opportunity to discuss. In a bigger course, in my civil procedure course where I have 70 students and it's gigantic and they don't all have an opportunity to speak, there I might want a really excellent discussion forum, which I think Twin and Lexis do really well, Web CT also, and which when I was doing it with Microsoft Front Page, I had to use our institution's threaded discussion software, which was a lot less good than what was available on these courseware packages. So it's because my goals for different courses and the way that I set up the different courses is different, that I use different things, because I think that things sometimes work better for a particular idea. And that's really the overarching theme of this, is that I don't want you to go away saying, oh, she prefers this and thinks that this would be best for me, because I really think that that's the wrong approach. I think you need to sit down and say, what's really important to me, and how can I be the most effective teacher, and what can help me in my teaching? Because all of these are just tools, and they're really just there, to help you. You've got to think about what do you like, what are you most comfortable with. So I might have my personal preferences, but yours might differ a lot from mine. Yes.
I'd like to follow up on the usage question that was asked earlier. In the thread discussion groups, if you're a professor and you introduce a topic and you ask the students to respond to a question, and then they follow up with their responses, is there a way to monitor that discussion thread so that you can find out which students, if any, have read particular threads?
You mean the question is whether you can monitor a particular thread?
Can you find out who's read which part of the discussion?
I don't think you can. I think you can only figure out who has gone to the discussion forum at a particular time, and I don't think that any of them, please correct me anyone if you're, if you disagree, that you can track, down to that level of specificity. You can simply look at the discussion forum and see, you want to see that someone read a particular posting at a particular
As
time.
opposed to having responded to it. Obviously, if they respond to it, that they've read it, or you assume they have. But for example, if you want to pose a question to the class, and you want to find out who's actually logged on to your posting, can you find that out?
I guess you could find out whether, if you sent them an email to request that they read the posting, you could track whether or not they opened the email or not. But I don't think that you can track whether or not they've read a particular posting as far as whether they've accessed the discussion forum. I think we're pretty much out of time. So thank you, everyone, for your patience. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. And of course, my email is up there too if you have any other questions in the future.